As Nicolas Maduro faces shortages of food and electricity, he sends in the troops, Russian troops. Could a foreign military be helping to prop up Venezuela's socialist revolution? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmakers are Maduro's allies. President Nicolas Maduro is fighting for his political life as more than 50 countries, including the United States, no longer recognize him as Venezuela's legitimate leader. At home, the situation is even more dire. Grocery stores have had bare shelves for years, but now Maduro has had to announce the rationing of electricity for the next 30 days. The controlled outages are meant to relieve Venezuela's strained power grid, but it'll force schools to shut down and businesses to close halfway through the day. It's a blow to Maduro's supporters, so reinforcements have been called in. During the past week, dozens of Russian soldiers and a shipment of Chinese humanitarian aid have landed in Venezuela, along with thousands of Cubans who are thought to be working for Venezuela's intelligence services. So what are they all doing there? Well, let's ask our panel. In Paris is Temir Porras. He's the former chief of staff to President Nicolas Maduro and advisor to Hugo Chavez. In Toronto is Alessandra Polga, a spokeswoman for the opposition Vente Venezuela party. And joining us from Washington, D.C. is Pedro Mario Burelli. He's a former executive board member of the country's state-owned oil firm Petróleos de Venezuela. I thank you all for joining us. Temir, let me start with you. Is it a sign of weakness from Maduro that he's had to ask for Vladimir Putin's help?
Well, it's no secret that Venezuela is going through a economic and social crisis. So, everybody in the country understands that the country needs economic recovery, needs international help, if you will, to get out of the current situation. So, no, I don't think it's a sign I don't think that in particular is a sign of weakness. I would have preferred, of course, that a broader coalition, if you will, of political forces and social forces in Venezuela would agree on a, I would say, more comprehensive humanitarian aid following the protocols of humanitarian action, of course, in order to assist Venezuelan authorities in tackling these very serious problems. Okay,
but Temir, would you accept that a lot of them have suspicions when the Russians don't only come with aid, they come with soldiers, and there are even pictures doing the rounds of Chinese humanitarian aid delivered by people who look like soldiers on places like Margarita Island. It looks like Maduro is trying to inoculate himself from a U.S. invasion rather than feed his people.
Well, again, one needs to understand the current situation of the country. Venezuela is under the threat of military action. The U.S. government has threatened the Venezuelan government it has repeatedly said that all options are on the table. And on the other hand, Venezuela has I would say, long-lasting military cooperation with Russia. From at least 2006, when the U.S. banned all weapons sales to Venezuela, Venezuela basically switched and established a military alliance with Russia, among other countries in the world, but especially with Russia. And what we have seen in the past days, again, it's, yes, of course, symbolic. It's a sign that is sent from Venezuela and from Russia to to those in the U.S. who are advocating for this crazy idea of a military action. But again, I think that the country should, and the international community and the country should turn to more pressing issues, which is, once again, finding a Venezuelan solution to the current crisis so that we can address the problems of the Venezuelan people.
Okay, so Alessandra, Maduro is threatened by the U.S., and Trump has threatened Maduro, and he's taking precautions, no more, no less.
I think that this is a manipulation. This is not true that Maduro is threatened by Trump. The humanitarian crisis in Venezuela is human-made. It's responsibility for the very bad administration of the Maduro regime. The reason that he is not recognized right now is because he went with a sham election in May 20th. Nobody recognized the result. At the end, we don't have, he's not any longer the president of Venezuela. And up to our constitution, we have now Juan Guaido as interim president in Venezuela. The problem that we have with the blackout of the lack of hydro energy is completely responsibility of the years of corruption and zero maintained to the hydro system. Everybody knows the case of Derwick. It's a group of suitcase company who make contracts and trade with the regime to bring replacement and yeah,
right.
it's completely responsibility.
Okay, so you see it as corruption and mismanagement as to the power shortages, right? Pedro, let me paint a picture for you right now. So we've got the Supreme Court making moves to take away Guaido's immunity, so he could be in jail soon. We've got the Russians sending their troops, they're landing. So even though 50 countries have recognized Guaido as the leader of Venezuela, he could be in jail. The Russians are there. We saw what happened with Bashar al-Assad once the Russians decided to start helping Bashar al-Assad. So is this a fight that the opposition is going to lose?
Well, first of all, I think we have to focus on what the crisis is. I mean, we've got a huge humanitarian crisis that has only gotten worse because of the collapse of the Venezuelan infrastructure, because it's not electricity. Much more serious is what's happened with the waterworks. I think we're having a massive crisis, not only of availability of water, but the quality of the water people are receiving when they do receive water. This is a huge crisis. Add to that, obviously, the food crisis. This is a fundamental crisis of Venezuela. On top of that, we have a political crisis. And then on top of that, we have a show. And the show is the Russian show. Russia, I can guarantee, that knows what's going on in Venezuela better than the United States. They have invested in Venezuela, they have sold to Venezuela, and they have seen the consequences. They have lost some money in their investments, they haven't get paid back on their debt, and they know the level of maintenance and the way the operational capabilities of the Venezuelan armed forces. What came the other day in planes, after Venezuela made a payment to Russia, after long years of delay, was maintenance equipment to try to put back together the military systems that had been bought on the last years, none of which were really the best. Probably those deals were the ones that yielded the highest commissions for intermediaries. And Venezuela's military is full of Russian hardware that has to be maintained. By the way, that will have to be maintained even if power shifts or when power shifts to the opposition, because those are assets of the Republic of Venezuela. Maybe we should never have bought them, but they're there. I do not believe that Russia wants to get involved in Venezuela. I don't think Russia will get involved in Venezuela a la Syria. I don't think even the proximity of the military probabilities of Russia being involved exist. I mean, Russia is always a threat. Russia will always want to be on the table. Russia is a nuclear power, but it's not a military power in the Western Hemisphere. So what I want to make sure is that people don't take two planes full of maintenance people that have to come and maintain a whole array of badly maintained military hardware as an invasion from Russia. That is not true. And it's
but there was a response from the United States. Okay, but certainly, but there was a response from Pompeo, there was a response from Pence, there was a response from Trump, right? So it's rubbed them up the wrong way. They're angry.
But that was diffused. There was also a meeting between the special coordinator for Venezuela and the deputy foreign minister of Russia, and I think there'll be another meeting. The real thing is what we're doing for show and what the reality is. I am 100% convinced, having spoken many, many times with Russian officials, that they actually understand the gravity of the situation. They might want to protect their contracts, but the fact is that nobody who's close to Venezuela would say that we have a political crisis. No, we've got a all-out crisis. We've got a crisis that touches every aspect of Venezuela.
Okay, Alessandra, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we've had you on the program before, so I want to paraphrase something that you said in the past to Temir, because Temir, you say this needs to be a Venezuelan solution to a Venezuelan crisis, and you want everybody to come together and sort this out. Alessandra and others in the opposition accept that, But first, they believe Maduro must go because they believe Maduro has wrecked the economy to the extent that he won't be a help at all moving forward. Why don't you address her directly? Tell Alessandra why you disagree.
No, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree. What I want to be is realistic. I mean, if the solution, a hypothetical solution for the crisis is that President Maduro must step down, that needs to be the end, if you will, the end goal of a negotiation process. I mean, one cannot request from the country to solve the problem before even addressing it. If we're going to address the political crisis in the country, we need to think about feasible solutions that will involve all parties in the country, all political parties in the country. So again, I understand that some in the opposition might request for President Maduro to step down, but the problem for them in this case is that President Maduro is not willing to step down, and that's why exactly we are in a stalemate. If we want to overcome that stalemate, we have to measure once again what is the balance of power inside Venezuela, and try to come out with a practical, pragmatic, something actionable, doable by Venezuelans in the shortest period of time, because we need to address, as it has been said, you know, the humanitarian, social, and economic crisis that the country is embedded in.
Okay, Alessandra, be practical and pragmatic and work with Maduro.
We can work with him because we have internationally proved that he is a very, very, very bad administrator. We don't need 6 more years to prove that he can solve what he created. Because what's happening right now in Venezuela is completely his responsibility. He's completely guided. It's practically a political state. They don't fix nothing after he was appointed for Chavez in 2013. At the opposite, the country is getting worse at the point that we are right now. And of course, he wants to stay in the power because he is a dictatorship, and he is involved in a criminal state. The motive is he needs to survive. The only thing that he's not going to be under the international law, it's because he is still in Venezuela, and he wants to keep under any cost the power in Venezuela.
Okay, Temir.
But legally he's not.
No, again, I understand this lady represents a fraction of the opposition, a small fraction of the opposition. Once again, what I'm trying to address is the bigger picture. Venezuela has been divided, polarized during the last 20 years between anti-Chavistas and Chavistas. And we all know that the opposition, if you will, anti-Chavismo and Chavismo, are today divided. There are many factions, there are many different opinions within those political groups. But my impression today is that everybody is aware of the fact that we need to come as quick as possible to a negotiating table, and we need to gather around that negotiation, you know, the largest number of political forces in the country, and say both to Mr. Guaido or Mr. Maduro and to the international community that we Venezuelans want to build our own solution. And the only sustainable, stable solution for the country is a negotiated one. Imagine that the government collapses. Imagine that Mr. Guaido takes over. Mr. Guaido represents, again, a minority of the opposition. This is a group that has only 14 MPs in a 167 seat National Assembly. How do you build a majority coalition coming from that?
That's an interesting
point. How do you address the problem of the Venezuelan military?
Interesting
Again,
point.
we need that negotiated outcome.
Interesting point, because you say he represents a fraction of the opposition. According to more than 50 countries, he does not represent just a fraction, but he represents the popular will, if you like, of the country. Pedro Mario Borrell, when Temir said that, you were shaking your head in disagreement. Tell me why.
Well, it was almost everything that he said, I'm in disagreement. First of all, because I think Venezuela's problem is man-made, has to be solved by Venezuela, but can only be solved with tremendous amount of aid from outside, in every sense of the word aid, from humanitarian aid to economic aid to political assistance to security assistance. I mean, Venezuela has got itself into one of the biggest messes a country has ever got itself in. When you're talking about a plan to go to the IMF, the size of the plan makes the Greek plan look small. When you look at the security plan, it makes Plan Colombia look small. When you look at the humanitarian aid, it looks some of the big humanitarian campaigns in Africa and the Middle East look small. So it is easy to say that we can solve the problems, except if you actually do get the right dimension of the problems, we need a lot of help. The first thing that you need is a government in place. And what we definitely do not have right now is a government. The people who are usurping government actually are denying that there's a crisis. They keep insisting that this is a made-up crisis while people are dying and fleeing. So the first issue is that Mr. Porras' old boss, that he was very loyal to, is denying the crisis that he has created through mismanagement, through stupid ideas, and terrible advice, fundamentally from the hardline Cubans that basically make a lot of the decisions in Venezuela. So we've got to get rid of that for the rest of the country to get together. One. Two, Guaidó does not represent Voluntad Popular. Guaidó is the president of a National Assembly, the majority of which is controlled by the opposition, and they're firmly behind him. That is what politics is. That is what coalitions are. It's kind of surprising to have somebody saying, let's bring everybody together, and then talk about splitting people in little groups. That's an absurd way of looking at politics. Okay. Mr. Guaidó, even as an individual, represents himself. He's part of a party. That party is part of the opposition. That opposition is part of the majority. And that's the way democratic politics works. I have no clue what he's talking about uniting the country if he doesn't understand that little concept about how democratic politics work.
Okay, listen, I'm out of time, but I'd love to have you all back on the program soon. And this is an interesting test of Maduro's leadership. For the moment, he's asking people for patience with the power rationing over the next month. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the country. We're keeping a close eye on Venezuela. Temir Porras, Alessandra Polga, and Pedro Mario Borrell, I thank you for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, this week's special series on Jordan takes us to the Dead Sea, where the country is locked in a political battle with Israel over water. And we ask why Britain's ruling Conservative Party welcomed back several politicians who made racist and Islamophobic remarks. The Dead Sea is dying, and water is becoming a national security issue in Jordan. Along with a semi-arid climate and thirsty neighbors, Jordan has become home for more than 1 million Syrian refugees, making its limited water supplies more precarious than ever. A multi-billion-dollar project to pipe water from the Red to the Dead Sea has been on the agenda for years, despite increasing political tension with Israel. And critics argue the project only aims to hurt Israel's pocketbook. With another installment in this week's special series, Yola Abdavid reports from the Jordan Valley.
Amman has 4 million people, drawn from all over Jordan and beyond, hoping to find work and a decent salary. In the middle of this concrete forest, there's a thirsty city, consuming one of Jordan's most precious resources.
When we will have an increased demand of 21% kingdom-wide, you don't have time to develop long-term expensive schemes. You really need to come up with the water in a very short time or while. And the only available short-term solution is groundwater. And this is really unfortunate because we have added to the over-exploitation and over-abstraction of water.
Having enough food is important. In the last 15 years, the population has doubled to more than 10 million people. With waves of refugees from Palestine, Syria and Yemen, Jordan's now ranked as the world's second poorest country in terms of water resources. Many blame Israel for being greedy, but others suggest more pragmatism.
The need of realpolitik when it comes to deal with Israel. What Jordan needs today, as long as they maintain a peace treaty and security coordination to make benefit of this relation. So we need to find partners and have ideas to make use of this important geography of Jordan. And this means realpolitik. You have to be friend for all your neighbors.
Over the last 60 years, the Dead Sea has shrunk by a third. Water levels drop by a metre each year. That, say scientists, is accelerated as the populations of Israel, Jordan and Syria extract too much from the Jordan River and Sea of Galilee.
And we receive our water shares as per the peace treaty. Now with Syria it's much more complicated, and since 1987 when the water agreement was signed, it has been quite problematic, the implementation of the shared water agreement. Upstream the Syrians have built more dams and drilled more water wells than the agreement stipulated.
Downstream the Dead Sea is dying at a time when more people than ever come to visit the lowest point on land.
The number of tourists holidaying in Jordan rose by 8% in 2018, and that figure is expected to rise again with new developments being built here on the Dead Sea shore. And a $1.5 billion Jordanian Kuwaiti project is also underway to add more hotels, shops and an amusement park, because tourism is so important for Jordan's economy.
Jordan depends on surface water for a third of its supply through the 1987 agreement with Israel and Syria. The Syrians don't honour the agreement and have built 35 dams on the Yarmouk River. Since the 1960s, Israel has siphoned off water for its farms, roughly half the water that flows down the Jordan. As a result, businesses in the lower Jordan Valley have to drill deeper wells and face shortages despite growing lemons, cucumbers and dates commercially.
We expect the government to have a more active role about the water stored in Galilee Lake, because the water of the Yarmouk and the Jordan rivers are stored there, and we should be able to access it. We need it for agriculture and drinking water. The government should be more active in building a big reservoir to store our water.
Jordan has plans to invest $3.5 billion to ensure its water supplies. But will it be enough, as the water diminishes each year and is now an issue of national security? Yolo Abdavid, the newsmakers in the Jordan Valley.
Well, joining me now in West Jerusalem is Gidon Bromberg. He's the director of EcoPeace Middle East, an organization that brings together Jordanians, Palestinians and Israelis to cooperate over environmental protection. Gidon, good to have you on the Newsmakers. How precarious is Jordan's water situation?
Well, the situation for the region as a whole is precarious, and for Jordan in particular. Since the influx of close to 2 million refugees from Syria into Jordan, the situation's clearly got much, much worse. And given climate change has hit Jordan and the rest of the region so harshly, much more than the IPCC models had predicted, we're seeing, we've seen over these last 20 years, 15 years of drought. There are a few countries in the world that could handle such a terrible situation.
Right, and politically, so last November, Jordan requested more water from Israel, and it cancelled a peace treaty annex. When we look at the politics of it all, and the Jordanians essentially saying the Israelis are siphoning off our water, is that true, and what does it mean?
So overall, much of the cooperation between Israel and Jordan has been actually based on water. There's been a long history of cooperation. Even before the peace treaty was signed between the two countries, Israel and Jordan were cooperating quietly behind closed doors in secret picnic meetings on the Yarmouk River to distribute water between them. I think that overall, the last, the 25 years of the since the peace treaty, we have seen good cooperation over water. There is current tension between Israel and Jordan, in particular concerning the so-called canal or the Red Dead project. And here, the idea is to build a desalination plant in Aqaba that would supply water for Jordan and perhaps sell water also to Israel. I think that it is critical that the desalination plant in Aqaba moves forward. There are concerns as to how to deal with the brine, but there's no question that Jordan needs its own desalination plant for its own internal water security issues. But regional cooperation is also desperately needed. There's no question that the cheapest source of additional water in the region today is desalination on the Mediterranean. And the comparative advantage of desalination lies on the Israeli and on the Gaza and on the Palestinian shores. And at Ecopeace, we've been promoting a concept of interdependencies where, in addition to the desalination that is needed in Aqaba, additional water supplies can come from Israeli and Palestinian sources of desalination on the Mediterranean. But in exchange, which is equally important, Israel and Palestine purchases green electricity, solar power from Jordan. So we create healthy interdependencies between our three peoples, between our three countries.
You said there's disagreement over what to do with the brine or the excess salt water when it comes to the Red Dead project. As far as I understand, the best thing to do is to pump it back into the Dead Sea so the Dead Sea doesn't die, right? What's controversial about that?
So there are environmental concerns that clearly Ecopeace has expressed about the mixing of the brine to the Dead Sea. The quantity doesn't really stabilize the Dead Sea anyway, and there's great cost. And I think what's stopping the movement of the brine at this time is the expense. There are other alternatives, and at Ecopeace, we just think that we should study the different alternatives. The brine could be evaporated in salt pans in the desert. The brine could be injected into the deep waters of the Gulf of Aqaba. There are three solutions on the table as far as we understand, and there needs to be further studies that show which alternatives are the most environmentally sound and most economically affordable. It's not the brine issue really that is the impediment. There is a need for a broader understanding here. There's a need for a deal, right. And we at Ecopeace support a deal making on water and energy for the benefit of Jordan, Israel, and Palestine together.
Right. Do politicians and others undervalue the importance of water as a potential trigger to make things worse? The region's hardly at peace. There's military occupation, there's death and destruction, and lots of tension. Is it undervalued?
Very much so. Water is still seen as a low-level political issue. When we talk about water security in our part of the world, we mostly are hearing how to protect water reservoirs or water facilities in a military perspective. With climate change impacting the region so heavily, at Ecopeace, we're trying to educate the public and broader decision makers that no side can go alone.
Gidon Brogberg, good to talk to you on the Newsmakers. Thanks for joining us. More than a dozen British politicians who've made racist and Islamophobic remarks have been welcomed back into the fold by the Tories. The UK's ruling Conservative Party first suspended these individuals over an array of offences, from describing Saudis as sand peasants, comparing Asians to dogs, and Muslims to cavemen. And if you didn't know about their reinstatements, it's because there was no public announcement. Instead, it only came to light from an investigation by The Guardian newspaper. So, how could it happen? Here's Denise Savoya with more.
It was just over a week ago that thousands of people in London held a vigil for victims of the New Zealand terror attack. But while people around the world are acknowledging the need to take more serious steps to stop a rising tide of Islamophobia, the UK has seen a surge in anti-Muslim hate. In the week after the Christchurch attack, hate crimes targeting the UK's Muslim community rose by almost 600%. And now it appears Prime Minister Theresa May's Conservative Party is struggling to contain anti-Muslim sentiment within its own ranks. The Twitter account Mates Jacob has been documenting cases of Islamophobia from Tories for years. Last month it went public with evidence it had collected of racist and anti-Muslim posts.
Well, it was Islam is like alcoholism. The first step to recovery is admit you have a problem. Yeah. Is that acceptable?
No, it is not acceptable.
Right, so why was he still allowed to stand?
As a result, dozens of Conservatives had their membership suspended. But last weekend, The Guardian reported that 15 Conservative councillors had had their membership reinstated.
Revolving door racism is the new policy, it seems. Media storm leads to suspension, and when no one's looking, we simply sneak them back in.
When it comes to fighting anti-Muslim hate, even Conservative Party members have accused May of burying her head in the sand.
I think she doesn't listen. I think she fails to acknowledge when there is a problem. She fails to tackle that problem head on.
Others flat out deny there's a problem.
You know, I think a party that has a Muslim as a Home Secretary is not a party that could be accused of being Islamophobic.
The Prime Minister has defended the party's investigation.
The Conservative Party has a complaints process which deals with complaints of Islamophobia and complaints of any other sort against councillors or other members of the party. It is absolutely clear that discrimination or abuse of any kind is wrong. We take action against where there are cases of discrimination or abuse.
For the past 3 years, the Labor Party has been facing accusations of anti-Semitism, and the Tories have not been afraid to criticise them for it.
We can never be too blasé about anti-Semitism. We can never be too tolerant of anti-Semitism, and the party opposite can never be too apologetic about anti-Semitism.
Now the Conservative Party stands accused of being blasé about Islamophobia. Last year, an all-party parliamentary group on British Muslims defined Islamophobia as a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. It's been formally adopted by Labor, the Liberal Democrats and the Mayor of London, but not by the Conservatives. So is the party ignoring anti-Muslim hate in its ranks?
We have to stop the denial. There has to be an acknowledgement that this is a real issue and has been an issue for many years.
The first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem. Denise Savoya, The Newsmakers.
Let's go to our guests in London. They include Conservative Party activist Ali Fazl and the co-founder of the Islamic Human Rights Commission, Arzu Merali, as well. Thanks for joining us, Ali. So 15 Tory councillors, they get suspended over anti-Muslim comments, over racist comments, and then, I don't know, they take a couple weeks off and they're quietly reinstated. Does it show us that the Tories are not serious about anti-Muslim sentiment in the party?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, as soon as these claims of Islamophobia came out, Brandon Lewis, the Conservative Party chairman, was very quick, very swift to act on these Islamophobic comments that were made. He made it very clear right from the very start that there is no place for Islamophobia in our party. When he became chairman, he implemented the Respect Pledge, which set a very high bar in terms of how we use political language and the responsibility that we need to have when we talk about political issues. So I think we've seen some very strong leadership on this case from the Conservative Party. These councillors who were suspended had clearly said something wrong. We made it very clear that there is no place for this in the Conservative Party. They had their correct training before they were...
But help me understand what that training was. Okay, so Ali, right. Okay, because they were quietly reinstated and it only took a Guardian investigation for us to find out that they were actually reinstated. So what was it? Did they just go away and every morning they drank a pro-Muslim smoothie in the morning and suddenly they came back and all the Islamophobia went away? Like, what was the training? What happened to them during that process to give us the confidence that they could be councillors again without bigotry?
Well, Imran, you'll know as well as I do that a lot of these investigations are kept confidential because it is the nature of these sorts of investigations, for the sake of people to be able to come out freely and express how they feel about them, that it is quite important that they're kept confidential. So, of course, we will not know the full extent of the training which they received, but I'm confident in the leadership in the sense that when these statements were made by these individuals, Brandon Lewis, the Prime Minister, and everybody in the leadership of the Conservative Party was very, very upfront about it.
Okay,
there is no
but are you
space
confident
for Islamophobia in the party?
Okay, are you confident that those councillors who called Muslims cavemen and sand peasants and so on were properly reformed in their 2 or 3 week timeout?
Well, I think first and foremost, what I think they've realised is that within our party, within the Conservative Party, there is zero space for intolerance towards Muslims and any religious groups at all, and that has been made very clear to them.
Okay.
Now that they've come back to the party, I'm sure that they will bear that in mind and carry on moving towards championing the Conservative cause in that goodwill nature.
Okay, Arzu, there's zero space for intolerance within the Conservative Party. This is coming from Ali, who's a Tory Muslim. He has faith in the system that it will sort out the bad apples. What do you think?
I think you used a very important word there in that system. I think there are a couple of issues really with what's been going on. We can go endlessly into the minutiae of disciplinary processes and individual cases. And unfortunately, you know, these people were picked up, but it's not like these are the only complaints that have happened. You've got high-profile figures like Baroness Warsi saying, you know, this is like a kind of normal experience for her to kind of put up with these types of comments, etc., from membership, from senior figures within the party. You've got someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg endorsing the leader of AfD in Germany, who's made the most outrageous anti-Islam, anti-Muslim remarks. And, you know, let's be honest, their policies are not far behind. So it's not just about individual cases. It's about the system. Why is it that we don't have a kind of, you know, in-depth structural understanding that some things are just beyond the pale? And quite honestly, as someone of my age, we did have this about 15, 20 years ago in the kind of equalities lexicon and culture of this country. Why are we going so fast backwards?
Okay, so Arzu, let me pose this to you then. Along the political spectrum, on the right, you're bound to find on the fringes on the right a lot of people who hold racist views. That's just basically how it is everywhere, right? And on the left, on the fringes, you're quite likely to find people who say, eat the rich, and so on, right? Is this a case of people on the fringes, or is it a case of the mainstream of the Tories being systemically anti-Muslim and Islamophobic? Because what we hear from Ali is that this isn't systemic. Address that.
Yeah, I think we have to really look at Islamophobia within a sort of a set of societal problems that we have, which include all different forms of racism, but also other types of marginalization, for example, the demonization of poor people, etc. And increasingly, you know, and I'm not talking about 5 years, I'm talking about 15, 20 years, we're seeing these discourses across the mainstream of the right and the left, or the so-called left. So, you know, it's not about fringes anymore. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. This is not about the skinheads chasing you down the streets of North London. This is about that type of idea being replicated on a grand scale. Now, look, racism has never gone away. It's embedded in the core of this in many countries around the world, particularly former colonial powers, who haven't really kind of gotten rid of their, you know, the hierarchical structuring of their societies according to many issues, but particularly race. But it's now very open in the way it's being expressed. You know, we thought we'd gotten away from the time of Enoch Powell and Rivers of Blood speeches, but especially since Brexit, we're having a kind of, you know, onslaught again of this type of language and imagery and tropes in the United Kingdom, a place which, as I mentioned, for a while at least, had managed to suppress that type of language, had made it at least in the public taboo.
Okay, so Ali, the Conservatives are in power. They've mainstreamed bigotry and they've brought back stuff that should have been put away a long time ago. That's the word from Arzu. What do you say?
I mean, I fundamentally have to disagree with that point of view. I have been a member of the Conservative Party for almost 4 years now. In my time as someone who goes out campaigning every other week, as someone who has stood as stood for local council, and as someone who wishes to carry on contributing to the party, never in my time in the Conservative Party have I ever felt not welcome, or have I felt that I've been treated unfairly because of my religion. And I think it's all well and good us here, you know, on this news channel talking about Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. But why don't we actually ask conservative Muslims and the grassroots? And I totally understand, and I have a lot of respect for Baroness Warsi, but I'm afraid I disagree with her on this issue. And I think if you ask Muslims across the Conservative Party how they feel about their leadership and how they feel about being Muslims in the Conservative Party, I don't think you'll find that any of them find those two things to be contradictory
but Ali,
in
would
any
you
way
accept,
at all.
okay, so even if it's not absolutely coming from the leadership, let's talk about it a little bit in terms of the voting public, those who would tend to vote Conservative. When it comes to someone like Sadiq Khan, right? A lot of the time, it seems as if a lot of these people just can't handle the fact that a liberal, Labour, Muslim mayor is taking care of London. Very similarly to the rise of the right wing in the United States when Barack Obama was the president, right? Would you agree that there's been a racist backlash against someone like Sadiq Khan, and invariably it's come from people who would vote Tory?
I see where you're coming from. I see where you're coming from. However, on that second point, I would disagree with you. We don't know whether these people are actually Conservative voters. We don't know whether they will actually vote for there'd be members of our party either. I would agree with you there that there is definitely a problem in this country that we have got with Islamophobia, as we do with other forms of religious hatred like anti-Semitism. Right. But what is important is to understand that institutionally, the Conservative Party is not an Islamophobic party. Perhaps there are in the party, there have existed in the past some bad apples who perhaps give us a bad name, who have said some things that are wrong, that fundamentally go against what it means to be a conservative. And I can say from the bottom of my heart that I'm very pleased with the action that the leadership of my party has taken to you know, cast these people out and say that actually there's no space for this in the party and we won't stand for it. So I'm pleased to see that. But also when we talk about religious discrimination in political parties, we cannot sit here and talk about Islamophobia and not address other forms of religious discrimination that happen, like anti-Semitism in other parties.
That's true. And look, I'm not going to accuse you of... I'm not going to accuse you of whataboutery, because
trying to divert the subject.
Right, okay, fair enough. I'm not going to accuse you of that, because usually when people do that, they do it as their first response. But it's fair, I guess, to ask someone like Arzu, is this similar among the Tories to what we saw? And we've done segments dedicated to the question of anti-Semitism within Labour, right? Is this similar to the debate of alleged anti-Semitism within Labour, Arzu?
I don't think it's anywhere near that. And I think we've got to sort of stop making this kind of equivalence when there's completely different things going on. Now, actually, I just wanted to say that I don't think that this is a Conservative-specific problem. I think it's societal. I think it cuts across the political spectrum. And I don't think it started with the Conservative government in its latest phase or even the Condem coalition. I think New Labour were instrumental in kind of fomenting what we call an environment of hate against Muslims, and that comes through policy, through political discourse, through the kind of anti-terrorism immigration laws they've brought in, etc., etc. Now, Ali, I'm glad you're very happy to be a member of the Conservative Party, more power to you, but I think you need to have higher expectations of the disciplinary process. You know, I mean, these people were reinstated quietly. There's been no kind of public acknowledgement from them of what they've done, no contrition. And, you know, it was all hidden, so it gives you a really bad taste in the mouth. It may well be that they're completely reformed, but for people who are the victims of what they said, which is effectively all Muslims and people with, you know, basic sensibilities, there's no sort of redress, and that's very, very important. But on a grander scale here, we're not really even touching the sort of, you know, the tip of the iceberg with what's happening in the Conservative Party, simply because there isn't this acknowledgement about structural issues. You know, Lord Macpherson, who brought up this issue of the metropolitan or the police forces across the country being institutionally racist 25 years ago or more, excuse me, was himself of a Conservative background. Okay, this is not something to shy away from. This is not, you know, something that's even deliberate on the part of many members. But it's something there that we need to address across different sectors of society. It's nothing to be so defensive or embarrassed about. But let's take this another step back and go, okay, we're talking about leadership here. You have figures like Michael Gove, who wrote Celsius 9/11, who has, pushed this ridiculous idea of a quote-unquote Islamic Trojan horse plot, blah, 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 which, in the words of Professor John Homewood and Professor Teresa O'Toole have said, is a travesty of justice on the scale of Hillsborough, who are possibly going to be new leaders of the party. This is not something we can really escape from. And I don't think it's consonant with what's happening in the Labour Party. You have a whole different set of things going on there. And I think that, it's irrelevant to even compare them.
Ali?
I mean, I have to disagree. If we're looking at religious discrimination, we cannot look at one and ignore the other. We have to be very fair in the way we do this. And I can look at my government, my party, and my front bench and say, actually, I think what they're doing is actually quite good. And I think that I can look at them and say, I don't think any of the front bench of the Conservative Party sit there and are inherently Islamophobic. Whether the same can be said about anti-Semitism and other parties, and whether enough action has been taken in that sense, I don't know whether that can be said. And we need to be very fair in the way we look at this, because at the end of the day, we cannot place one above the other. At the end of the day, these are both forms of religious discrimination that need to be stamped out in every way possible.
But when we discuss this at the very top, Ali, you agree that that sort of punishment that they had, if we can call it that, was not good enough, right? Because you yourself, you're investing a lot of trust in the process that something good might have happened during those few weeks that they had a timeout, but you don't know. So just by saying, well, Labour didn't do much about accusations of anti-Semitism, that doesn't mean
that's not necessarily what I'm saying.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the Tories have done a good thing here, right?
No. That's not the point I was making. The point I was making was the one that was being discussed about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and whether those two can be compared in the different parties. But what you say, I go back to the point I made earlier. This is a confidential process. That is the nature of investigations. If every stage of this was transparent, then we would not have the quality of an investigation that we need to have for cases like this.
But we're not talking about a crime scene.
These are situations that are
We're talking about somebody going on Twitter.
These are situations.
We're talking about somebody going on Twitter saying, you've clearly not experienced the Pakistani hospitality, having a daughter raped by men who think she's white trash. We have people calling Muslims cavemen and so on. We're not talking about forensic crime scene investigation, right? Afterwards, why haven't we heard these politicians come out and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I messed up? We don't hear any of that.
Now, while I've not gone to check on the Twitter accounts of each and every one of those 15 individuals, I have come across apologies from some of these individuals who have said that actually what I said was absolutely unacceptable, and I will move on from this point having understood that what I've done is not okay and is not within the ethos of the Conservative Party, or is not within the ethos of what it means to be British, full stop. So if it means that these individuals have gone away, have pondered, have reflected upon what they've said, and are now coming back as individuals who now understand that this sort of thing is totally not okay and has no place in the Conservative Party, then I am okay with them understanding, appreciating that fact, and moving forward from here. Of course, it's not going to be, a potion, like you call it, or a one-night thing where they wake up the next morning and think and be totally different people. But it's a process. And what is better? I think, and this is quite an important distinction to make, is it better for someone to be thrown out and totally forgotten about forever because they've said one thing and perhaps animosity increases?
What if that one thing is deeply racist?
Go away, or go away, have the proper training, know that what they've said is totally unacceptable, there is no place for that in our society, come back as individuals who are looking for a fresh start to renew their understanding of Muslims across Britain, and actually try and actually change the way in which they've dealt with issues like this in the past.
Okay.
And I think it's the latter.
Okay. The latter, Arzu, do you trust the Tories to investigate and reform themselves?
Well, I think when I'm waiting for Michael Gove to have the relevant training, Jacob Rees-Mogg, some of the other senior figures, Boris Johnson, etc., in some ways I feel kind of almost like we're scapegoating these guys at the level who are quietly reinstated, because they're not the biggest problem. They're, if you like, a manifestation at a lower level of the hierarchy of what's really kind of being spewed out at the top of it, with all due respect. And I think that's why, when we're getting bogged down with these cases, as much as there hasn't been the right amount of public acknowledgement of what's been done, we have a bigger problem here. We have a much bigger problem at the top of the Tory party that we really need to be talking about.
Okay.
At the end of the day, grave injustices were done in the Trojan horse case. And I've not heard a peep out of Michael Gove to acknowledge anything that's gone wrong.
Can I just add?
Very briefly, please, Ali.
Can I just add? Yeah, so can I just add the fact that, so some of the members who were sort of seen to be saying these Islamophobic comments were in a group, like mentioned earlier, that was a Jacob Rees-Mogg support group. Jacob Rees-Mogg stood up and actually said that he in no way endorses the comments that were made by these individuals. There is no place for Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. He himself stood up and said these things. But also, we have a choice here. We have a choice here, and it's up to one nation, good, moderate, progressive Conservatives across my party to stand up, as they are doing at the moment, to say that actually the Muslims do have a place in the Conservative Party. It should be the natural home for the Muslims, and it's down for us to take that message out to the Muslim community. I can see why some of them might not be happy with the way things are at the moment, but it's down to us, and it's down, I suppose, it's down to the moderates and the One Nation Conservatives to take that message out and make it very clear that we are a tolerant party and we do have a space for all religious groups within our party.
Okay. Arzu, I tell you what, the sort of chummying with the AFD and so on, maybe let's save that for another segment, because that's fascinating as well across Europe, looking at those links. But I'm out of time. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you, Arzu Marale and Ali Fazl.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, after 4 years of war in Yemen, we ask how Houthi rebels have survived and thrived for so long. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.